So, I did just put out a review of Monster Hunter Wilds, and I do still love the game. I think the core gameplay is just as good as it ever has been. But as I mentioned in the review, there are definitely a good number of things that I do have major criticisms for, and that I hope that they improve upon throughout the game's life cycle. So I thought that I would try and condense and collect all of those various criticisms into one video, especially because when this video goes live, Capcom is actually currently holding an open feedback survey for Wilds. A lot of it is mostly about just basic information gathering stuff, like where you first heard about the game and what convinced you to buy it and things like that, but if you press on through the boring checklist items, you do eventually get to a part of the survey where you have a totally free answer section to simply describe what you like and what you dislike about the game. So there will be a link in the description to that survey that you can check out while it's still live up until March 27th. So make sure to check out that survey while you still can if you want to echo some of my sentiments or add some of your own to the pile. So to start things off, I don't think there's much point in talking about things like wanting more monsters to hunt, for example. Like, obviously I do, but the starting roster of Wilds is about on par with Rise and World at about 30 or so monsters, counting some of the duplicates, and we already know that they're going to be adding more monsters in title updates over the course of the next year or so, and of course, the inevitable Master Rank DLC will probably double the roster count from there. So what I want to focus on in this video are things that I think that Capcom could realistically do to improve the game dramatically, but might not necessarily already have planned or otherwise be a priority for them to actually implement. So, for example, to start with, obviously performance is the big one. It's the main reason why the game has a mixed review score on Steam right now, and I honestly hope that Capcom is working on a major performance patch in the future. I mean, there are already several mods and some tweaks that you can do outside of the game's normal settings in order to improve the performance at least a little bit and squeeze out a few extra frames from your rig. And I honestly don't see why Capcom couldn't implement at least some of those fixes in the official game proper. Like, for example, the game is very CPU demanding, and yet it limits itself to only ever using 8 threads, no matter how many threads your CPU has. So if you have like a hyper-threaded CPU, or just a modern CPU that has way more cores and threads than that, then the game is just kind of limiting itself for no reason. And of course, people have noted that if you disable Capcom's anti-cheat stuff, that it can help reduce stuttering, and that feels extra pointless, considering that from what I understand, the game apparently has both Capcom's in-house anti-cheat and de novo installed at the same time, and like that just kind of seems excessive, and like it's just wasting performance. But there's no point in boring you with the details. The practical upshot is that they need to improve this game's performance. I don't care how they do it, but the people need their frames. The other big point that gets brought up a lot, of course, is the online multiplayer system. Now, I don't know what the hell happened behind the scenes, but it feels like they kind of went insane trying to make this multiplayer system. There's like 4 different kinds of lobbies you can enter, and then a squad system on top of that, and it's just kind of nuts. And like, after messing with it for a bit, and like reading up on some details about it, I think I have a handle on kind of what they were going for and why it's like this. And because like it's set up so that you can hunt together versus like just exploring the world together outside of hunts versus just pairing up with randos and stuff. But like there has got to be a better way to organize this, because when you first get presented with the multiplayer system, it is complete nonsense. Now, to be fair, they did also announce that Title Update 1 is going to be coming with a proper gathering hub, so I'm hoping that that means that maybe there will be a simpler way to do multiplayer hunts through that system, so fingers crossed on that one. But if it doesn't, then I hope that they help simplify things in the future in some way or another. And just some advice for those of you struggling with multiplayer, my recommendation is to just create a squad for you and your friends to join, and then once everyone's in the squad, you can just start up and load into a squad lobby when you want to play together. I don't know if that has all of the features of multiplayer, like being able to explore the world and stuff, but at the very least, that that will make everyone's quests pop up in each other's like lobbies so that you can at least join each other on hunts relatively easily, and it makes the multiplayer experience at least a little bit smoother and doesn't require messing around with as much of the sort of nonsensical like link party and environment link stuff that is currently in the game. Now, let's move on to some gameplay changes that I'd like to see, because I think that the simplest one is that I honestly think monsters just need more health across the board. Like, maybe I'm just too awesome and cool at Monster Hunter, but I can't help but feel like a lot of these hunts, even at late high rank, have just been really short. And I'm hardly the only one to comment that this game feels like the easiest Monster Hunter entry in the series so far. I know that it's just the base game, of course, and things will inevitably get harder as they release title updates and the DLC, but even for a base game on its own, it still feels like they could tune things up a bit. Like, in particular, frenzied monsters have it really bad. Like, I know that their whole gimmick is that they have less health in exchange for being more aggressive and more damaging, but according to modders, they literally have less than 50% of what already feels like a relatively small health pool, and it's to the point where I'm pretty sure I could hunt an entire frenzied monster in nearly the time it takes for me to read through these paragraphs. Like, there was literally a clip someone posted a few days ago of them killing a frenzied monster with only 5 greatsword hits. It's kind of absurd how little health they have. And I think that part of the problem is that hunters just have a lot of really good tools at their disposal now, like between landing KOs, offset attacks, guard clashes, focus strikes, wounds, status effects like paralysis and sleep, environmental effects, the list goes on. The point being that we're able to really bully the monsters with a wide variety of effects at this point, and that lets us perform some really devastating combos that can take out a huge swath of their health pool really quickly. And, like, the thing is that monsters are meant to, like, naturally build up resistances to these kinds of stuff. You know, like, the more that you KO a monster or flashbang it, the less effective that future KOs and flashbangs are meant to be. But the problem is that you're able to do so much damage in those opening sections when you're able to first stun the monster that they literally just don't live long enough for that to matter, or for them to build up those resistances in the first place. So, like, I think that if we literally just, like, doubled the base health pool for a lot of monsters, that honestly might solve the difficulty problem without having to make too many other changes. You could still get a lot of stuns and deal a lot of damage early on in the hunt, but with the extra health pool, then as time goes on, the monster would get harder to stun and paralyze and such, and then it would be able to be more offensive and be harder to deal with as the hunt goes on, and then hunts might actually last like a proper amount of time for a Monster Hunter hunt like you would see in some of the older games. And, like, I feel like this is especially needed in multiplayer, where I just don't think the scaling is right, because, like, you can have 4 times as many of these stunning and knockdown effects coming at the monster at once. So when you have 4 hunters just, you know, dogpiling onto a monster, it feels like they barely ever get a chance to fight back. And so, like, if anything, maybe you should make monsters more resistant to that kind of stuff from the start in multiplayer. And as for frenzied monsters, maybe instead of cutting their health pools in half, maybe only decrease it by like 2/3 or so. Like, it doesn't need to be like paper thin health pools in order for them to represent the frenzy. Like, they need to actually be able to display their increased aggression, and if they have so little health that they die in 5 hits, you just can't do that. And like, obviously, I could get more in depth with it. Like, I think that the exact balancing of all of these different factors could be adjusted individually, but like, I don't know what the exact values need to be without playtesting, of course. And, you know, like, maybe wounds need to be made harder to form. Maybe monsters just need to have their aggression tuned up. I just don't know. But the point that I'm getting at here is that I think that increasing the monster's health pool is probably the simplest thing that they could do that would solve a lot of these problems, just based on how a lot of the other mechanics sort of interact with each other, and it would give the monsters more of a chance to really fight back and build up those resistances, and then, you know, they'd be able to actually pose a real threat to the endgame hunters again. On a similar note, in regards to monster behavior, I've also seen some people pointing out how skills like windproof, earplugs, and tremor resistance are all still in the game, and yet hardly any monsters, even monsters that you would expect to use them a lot, barely seem to actually make use of the abilities that these traits are meant to nullify. Like, yeah, they do still roar at least, but I've barely noticed any kind of wind or tremor effects throughout my time playing the game, and if they are still there, then they're just so weak that they barely even matter. So I think that if they make it so that the monsters make better use of these effects, then that could also help sort of adjust the difficulty of the game. Because the whole point of these kinds of effects is that they're meant to help interrupt the hunter's combos so that they don't have time or the positioning to get off their most powerful attacks so often. And right now, I think that that's what the biggest problem is that there's just nothing stopping us from just going whole hog 100% in on the monster from second one, and as a result we're just able to demolish these health bars way too quickly. So if we gave the monsters back more of these kinds of tools, and then that way we'd have to also dedicate more of our skill slots to actually trying to nullify these. So at the very least, that would force us to not have as many offensive skills on our armor sets, and then that would lower our damage output, and then that would make the hunts last longer that way as well. And to be fair, I do think that part of it is that the roster is currently extremely light on Elder Dragons and other monsters of that tier, so hopefully more of those sorts of monsters get added with title updates and whatnot, and then maybe those sorts of monsters will actually make use of like wind and tremor and such and whatnot to actually be able to fight back against us better. Shifting things over to the weapon design, while I do like the actual physical, like, cosmetic look of all of the weapons this time around, I think they did a great job with that, I seriously think that they need to redesign some of the weapon skills. Like, some of these just make no sense to have on certain weapons. The worst offenders by far are all the weapons that, in seemingly every category, that have draw skills built into them, like critical draw or punishing draw. Like, these skills are only really useful on, like, two weapon types, greatsword and longsword. So why is every single weapon type coming with these sorts of things, especially lance of all things? And it feels like every single weapon class has skills like these, even if it's not the exact same skills. Like, what's the point of giving a weapon skills that they're barely going to be able to use? It is made up for by some degree by the Artian weapon systems, since those are a lot more customizable, and I do like it as an endgame system, but I personally feel like the balance there should probably be that, like, the Artian weapons are more customizable, but in theory, the actual core monster weapons, in my opinion at least, should have more total skill points overall if you're able to utilize all of their built-in skills effectively in combination with their slots. But when so many weapons have such useless skills attached to them, then it just causes players to write off huge swaths of the weapon tree, especially when the weapon skills are now such a huge part of the game and how you make your build. So I seriously think that they need to go through and just kind of rework some of these weapon skills to actually have skills that make sense for the weapon types that they're on. Because, like, otherwise I doubt that anyone is going to take a lot of these weapons seriously. On a similar note to that with Artian weapons, like I said, I do really like this endgame system. I think it's a great way to have a customizable weapon creation for the endgame, but I do think that it could use maybe a bit more customization for certain weapon types that have a bit more nuance to them. Like, for example, with Gun Lance, the shelling type of your lance matters greatly as to what playstyles you can use with it. So the fact that you seemingly can't control what type of shelling you get when you're making an Artian weapon is pretty annoying. Similarly with Hunting Horn, there's a lot of different factors that come into play when you're choosing what horn you want to use, with all the different songs that they can have, especially when combined with the new Echo Bubble types, and the ultimate songs on top of that, and like, you don't really have any real control over that either with the Artian weapons, and that just seems like a huge oversight to me. And like, I'm not exactly sure how it would work. Maybe those weapons could just have like a unique upgrade menu just for them to swap out some of those features or something like that. And I'm not saying that we need to take it as far as being able to pick like any combination of Hunting Horn songs, for example, but not being able to customize that stuff on weapons like that, like I said, it just feels like an oversight to me. And speaking of customization, now, come on Capcom, where's the weapon transmog? We know you can do it. There was weapon transmog back in World, and to a lesser extent it still existed in Rise. We know you can just add weapon transmog in the game from the get-go, and that you're probably just holding it off until either a late update or the DLC. And like, seriously though, like at the very least, I think that it would make sense if we could transmog the Artian weapons to look however we wanted, since those are meant to be the ultimate customizable weapon. But I think that at the very least, we should probably have full weapon transmog by now, since like, we have full armor transmog in higher rank. It took them a while before we finally got that in the base game, but we got it, so why don't we have weapon transmog? It could even work the same as the armor transmog does, where you still need to craft the actual weapon that you want to use as a skin on another weapon, so you have an incentive to hunt more monsters to craft those weapons, but it really should just be in the game by default at this point, and I don't know why it isn't. Now, this next one is probably my most radical proposal, since it is completely different from the current system in the game, but can we just, like, have a properly craftable decoration system again? I really liked how Rise handled decorations. Like, that system was just about perfect in my opinion. And yeah, I know that you can meld level 1 decos in addition to the RNG ones that you just get passively from hunting, but it's just not the same as having properly craftable decorations where you need to go out and hunt specific monsters and get specific parts to make them. Plus, I think that you don't need to get rid of the existing systems to do this. Like, what if they made it so that you can use the melding as it is currently for tier 1 decos, but if you wanted to make tier 2 or tier 3 decorations, then you would need to meld them using specific monster parts instead of the more generalized system. That way we can still have generic melding like for level 1 decos, like I said before, but you can still get higher tier decos through this system. And I mean, you still have the RNG system on top of that. I'm not saying they have to get rid of that either. This would just be another system to add to the game on top of that. And they could even make it so that, like, instead of picking from a long list of possible decorations, because now that decorations could have multiple skills, that would probably be an absurdly long list, but they could just make it so that it's like, okay, select this skill and this skill, and then that way, you just get like, oh, the melding lady's like, oh, okay, I can meld that for you, and I just need this, this, and this as monster parts, and then you can just add it to your wish list, and then now you can go out and hunt monsters to craft decorations, just like you would in Rise and a lot of the previous games. And that way, it could still be like somewhat dynamic as well. So like, if you wanted, say, load shells and guard up on a single decoration, then there would be monster parts that would be necessary for specifically the load shells and guard up skills that they would just kind of combine to make it possible to craft that one decoration. And then maybe they could add on a little bit extra depending on the like tier of the skill combo that you're trying to make. So like load shells and guard up might require like a couple of extra medium tier monster parts in order to craft, but if you wanted to get something that was, say, like attack up and crit up or handicraft and razor sharp, then that would be like, okay, that's big boy deco, deco. So in addition to the normal monster parts you need, you would also need like several gems in order to craft that decoration or something like that. And like that could actually be, I think, a really interesting system that makes it so that like you still have the RNG decos, you still have the generically melded tier 1 decos, and then you could have this system on top of that for like, I want this specific tier 3 deco with these 2 skills on it, and it's like, okay, go farm 5, you know, Arcvel gems from this thing and you can have it. You know, I just vastly prefer crafting decorations over relying on RNG. Like, the RNG isn't even that bad in this game. It's leaps and bounds better than World System, in my opinion. But it's still just not satisfying to get the decoration that you want just completely randomly. Like, yeah, it's nice to end a hunt and go, ooh, I got a huge attack gem. That's nice. But I much more enjoy having a goal to work towards and then actually working towards that goal, just like you do when you're crafting weapons or armor. And having craftable decorations in some form like this would just give me more reason to keep playing the game for longer. So really, it's just a win-win, Capcom. Like, come on. But yeah, other than all the other stuff I've mentioned so far, there are a few other minor complaints that I would like to see addressed. Like, for example, every time that you want to change out your items, you have to go into your tent and then go through this whole animation of getting in your tent and then getting back out of your tent again, and it just feels so unnecessary when every single prior Monster Hunter has just had a simple item box out in the open that you can use to quickly access and swap out your items much more easily without having to go through this rigmarole. Like, at the very least, I could understand needing to go into the tent for the pop-up camps, but like the home bases in each zone should just have item boxes out in the open, and I don't know why they don't. On a similar note, another feature they added in Rise was one where you could have hunter loadouts, which basically combined item loadouts, armor loadouts, and even layered armor loadouts, which I don't think are even in this game yet, and all of those things are just one super loadout so that you could much more easily swap between multiple builds and such without having to go, okay, well, I need the item loadout for this build, and then I need the armor loadout for this build, and then I need the layered. Like, it was just a whole like rigmarole that just like, why not just roll it forward? Like, we should have hunter loadouts by default in these games by now. Similarly, Wilds doesn't really have a traditional farm system. Instead, you unlock certain villagers in each town that can go out and collect items for you, which mostly just functions like the farm, if a bit more circuitous, but every time you want to collect stuff from them, even with Nata consolidating it all into one person, you still have to go in and talk to each, like, tab individually, and, like, would it be too much to ask for a simple take all button? You know, in general, I just think it's a bit strange how Monster Hunter's seemingly been so concerned with so many quality of life updates with the more modern entries, and yet they seem to like taking steps backwards in random regards for seemingly no reason. Like, there's probably a few other minor complaints like this that I'm just not thinking of off the top of my head, but you get the idea. There's just like a lot of these little random annoyances I feel could be smoothed out in either updates or the DLC or just something like that. Finally, I just thought that I would close out this video by just sort of having some fun, making a wish list of specific monsters that I would like to see added to the game personally. Like I said at the start, I'm sure that they will add plenty of monsters over time, but these are the ones that I would like to see in particular. Like, for example, we all know that Zinogre is inevitable. I think he was literally rated #1 in the, like, popularity tier list. So, like, there's no way they're going to not include Zinogre, and they're probably going to make a big deal about it in an update. There's a few others like that, like Brachydios I'm a huge fan of. We already know we're getting Mizusune, which is another big popular monster. More Elder Dragons in general, you know, Kushala Daora, Teostra, Chameleos, Kirin. Like, I know they're not necessarily popular to everybody, but like, we definitely need more Elder Dragons in this game. A lot of people have been saying that they should shadow drop Basilgoose in the first update, and I am 100% on board with that. They did that in Rise in the first update. Like, they didn't mention it in any of the videos, and I don't think they even mentioned it in the patch notes. They just made it so it was like, oh yeah, here's the first monster, and then when you go to hunt it, all of a sudden Basiljuice shows up to interrupt everything. And I think it would be great if they did the exact same thing again, because it would be really funny to see all the new players reacting to Basilgoose just literally showing up out of nowhere and just laying down bombs over the entire battlefield. Because, like, Basilgoose is my personal favorite invasive invasion monster, at the very least. I just love his design and concept. I think it's really cool. Though, speaking of invasion monsters, while, like I said, I prefer Basilgoose, but they definitely need to add Deviljho to this game for a very specific reason. Because a couple of years ago, the Monster Hunter community kind of lost their minds because there was this long-standing myth that literally everyone in the community seemingly believed that Deviljho could eat his own tail after you cut it off. Because his whole thing is that he's like so hungry and gluttonous that he just eats everything. And so it fit his character that he would eat his own severed tail if you just left it alone and didn't carve it in time. But it turned out, after like a couple of months of people trying to prove that this was a thing, that this actually was literally just a myth that never happened. No matter how many eyewitnesses claim that it supposedly does, we were never able to prove that it happened in any game. So they definitely need to add Deviljho to Wilds just so that they can finally add that interaction and we can finally get definitive evidence of Deviljho eating his own tail. Plus, like, in World, they added that feature where, like, Deviljho can pick up smaller monsters and literally toss them at you. Like, they could literally just reuse that, like, move set where he could pick up his own severed tail, chew on it for a bit, and then toss it at the hunter as a projectile. I think that would actually be a really fun way to implement that. But for other monsters, Valstrax I think would be really cool to see in Wilds' level of graphical detail. It's just such a cool concept for a monster. And not to mention, Valstrax is an interesting case because, like, canonically, Valstrax, despite being like a gigantic jet dragon, is meant to actually be relatively docile and keeps to itself, which is why in Rise, they made it so that you got Crimson Glow Valstrax, which is meant to be like basically a riled up Valstrax to have an excuse as to why we're fighting it, as opposed to a normal Valstrax. And like, Wilds has this interesting thing with the Guardian monsters where that kind of works as a perfect excuse to kind of add any monster to the game, because instead of having to come up with some sort of ecological reason for why it's in this area, you could just be like, oh, the ancients decided to grow this monster for some reason. Like, maybe they used Valstrax as a form of transportation or something like that, and then boom, now we have Valstrax pods opening up in Wyveria, and we could just fight Valstrax that way. It could be Guardian Valstrax. Like, that would, I think, be a really great way of introducing random monsters like that otherwise don't really have any business existing in the biomes that they've already set up for this game. What else? Oh, Celtis Queen. Celtis Queen is a good classic favorite of mine from, like, Monster Hunter 4, I think, is where they debuted. And I always really like Celtis Queen because it's a bug monster that was very different, because most of the bug monsters that we get have been spiders, and Celtis Queen was just more of like a beetle-themed monster. And on top of that, as the name suggests, it was kind of a 2-in-1 monster where you get both Celtis Queen and the Celtis itself, and I think that could play into the herd mechanics, because like there's not really that many monsters that actually like played with like herds in Wilds, because you have the Doshiguma herds, and then you have the Hirabami like tend to fight in groups, and like not really many others seem to do that. And so I think Celtis Queen could be a really good add, because I could easily see it being really cool to have a Celtis Queen surrounded by like a dozen small Celtises that are all like attacking you in formation under the guidance of their queen. Like, that could be a really cool concept for a monster in this game. And like, maybe you could still dung pod them off to try and get them away, but like the Celtis Queen still has like control over them, and so she just keeps calling them back, and it just becomes a problem. So that would be really fun to see. But yeah, I think that will do it for today. Feel free to let me know down in the comments what you think of my criticisms and wish lists for future updates. Do you agree, disagree, maybe think I left something out? Either way, I'm always eager to continue the conversation in the comments down below. And make sure to fill out that survey I mentioned. As I said, link is in the description, because after all, how is Capcom supposed to know what to fix if we don't tell them? But if you liked the video, make sure to leave me a like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this in the future. And if you want to really help the channel out, there is a link to my Ko-Fi in the description as well. But for now, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one. Oh, also, I would totally love it if Capcom would give Charge Blade an offset attack while in Axe mode. I know it totally doesn't need it, but it would be so cool. Okay, bye.